They didn't abandon this mansion because of age. They fled it, because behind these walls, something went so wrong that even old money, with all its power, silence, and influence, could not contain the damage. This estate once stood at the absolute center of Gilded Age society, built by a dynasty whose wealth shaped industries and bent political will. It was a palace designed to intimidate as much as impress. Senators dined here. Bankers begged here. Fortunes were protected and destroyed under these ceilings. From the outside, it was perfect. Inside, it was poisonous. Somewhere within this house, a line was crossed. A decision was made that traded humanity for reputation. A family member vanished from public life, not by accident, but by design. Their name was erased from invitations. Their portrait quietly removed. Their inheritance locked away behind legal language and silence. Official history never noticed, but the house remembers, because after that disappearance, everything began to rot. Marriages collapsed. Heirs turned on one another. Wealth that once seemed untouchable began to fracture under its own weight. Rooms were sealed. Letters burned. Entire wings of the mansion were closed forever. This was no ordinary decline. It was a punishment carried out slowly across generations as guilt settled into the stone itself. What was meant to be the crown jewel of old money became something else entirely, a monument to moral collapse. This is not a story of a mansion that fell to time. This is the untold rise and fall of the most cursed estate in Gilded Age history, and the family secret that ensured it would never survive. Chapter 1: The Mansion That Shouldn't Exist. It stands at the edge of the old coastline, like a survivor of a world long gone. A limestone giant built not for comfort, but for legacy. Locals call it the house that time forgot. Historians call it an architectural impossibility. But for the family who constructed it, it was a promise sealed in marble, gilded in ambition, destined for tragedy. The mansion did not begin as a symbol of mystery. It began as a victory. Its creator, Cornelius Harrow Linden, was one of the last true titans of the Gilded Age, a shipping magnate who refused to believe the age of empires was ending. While America shifted toward modernity, Linden built backward toward grandeur, toward excess, toward immortality. And so, in 1898, when the rest of the nation was tightening its belts, he commissioned a palace, not a home, a declaration, a mansion so enormous, so aggressively magnificent that architects whispered it was financial madness. A structure carved entirely by hand. Every cornice is imported. Every chandelier is custom forged. Every door is taller than the men who serve beneath it. Yet behind the shimmering facade, something else was being constructed, something darker, because this mansion was not built for the world. It was built for one person, a single heir, a child whose name would, decades later, vanish from every record. Chapter 2: The Heiress. No one was meant to see in a family obsessed with legacy. Every birth was an event, every heir a headline. But not this one. This heir arrived in silence. Her name was Evelyn Harrow Linden, the only child of the mansion's creator. Yet from the moment she was born, something was different. The newspapers that once celebrated every Linden milestone printed nothing. No announcements. No society column praise. No christening photographs. It was as if the child didn't exist. Rumors spread quickly through the servants' corridors that Cornelius Linden had built the mansion not to showcase his power, but to protect something, or someone. Evelyn grew up behind those towering doors, like a ghost in her own home. Tutors came and went through side entrances. Doctors arrived at midnight. No friends visited. No parties were thrown in her honor. Servants swore they saw her wandering the upper galleries alone, running her small hand along marble railings, whispering to portraits of ancestors she would never meet. And yet, she was brilliant, gifted, terrifyingly observant. Her governess once wrote in a letter, later discovered in an attic trunk, "The girl understands far more than she is allowed to know." But the most striking thing about Evelyn wasn't her intellect. It was her loneliness, a loneliness so profound, it seeped into the walls of the mansion itself. And according to one surviving diary entry from a maid, she is being hidden. But I cannot tell if they are hiding her from the world or hiding the world from her. By the time Evelyn turned 12, even the servants noticed the change. The mansion grew quieter. the doors locked earlier, the staff list grew shorter. Something was happening behind those gilded corridors, something no one would talk about. And in Chapter 2, one thing becomes painfully clear. The heiress was being protected. Or controlled. Or both. And in Chapter 1, we enter the mansion's grand hall for the first time, where the story of the Forgotten Heiress truly begins. Chapter 3, the mansion's secret room. Every Gilded Age mansion hides secrets. But this one hid a room no guest ever entered, and no heir was ever meant to discover. Evelyn found it by accident. She was 14 old, enough to question the silence around her, young enough to still believe secrets should not exist in her own home. It happened on a rain-soaked afternoon when the sky cracked open and drenched the estate in a sheet of silver. Thunder rolled across the hills and shook the chandelier, and for the first time, the mansion felt alive, responsive, almost restless. As she wandered the East Wing abandoned corridor her father forbade, she noticed something strange, a draft, cold, unnatural, seeping through the seams of a mahogany wall that should have been solid. When she pressed her hand against it, the wooden panel shifted with a soft groan, revealing a hidden door, and behind it, a narrow spiral staircase descending deep into the belly of the mansion. No gas lamps, no sconces, just darkness. Yet Evelyn stepped in without hesitation, her candle flickering as she descended the cold stone steps. Every footfall echoed like a heartbeat against the walls at the bottom. She found a room unlike anything upstairs, a chamber lined with shelves of old ledgers, folded deeds, stacks of letters bound in fading red ribbon, and in the center, a massive iron safe bolted to the floor. She recognized the family seal on its front, the Harrow-Linden crest, a serpent coiled around a laurel. Inside the secret chamber, dust floated like ghosts. But one thing was new, disturbed, a ledger left open on the table. Her candlelight illuminated a single chilling line. Expenses pertaining to the containment and care of EHL, her initials. Not education, not upbringing, not provision. Containment, care. Control, her breath caught. What was she being contained from? Or worse, contained for? In the corner of the chamber, she spotted something even stranger, a brass speaking tube hidden behind a column, leading upward toward the mansion's floors. Someone, her father, a doctor, a guardian she never met, had been listening to the upper halls for years. Evelyn backed away slowly, her candle trembling, because in that moment she realized the truth. She wasn't just an heiress. She was an experiment, a secret, a problem to be managed, a liability, and the mansion her sanctuary. Her prison, her world, had been built not for beauty, but for surveillance. She fled the chamber, the walls closing in around her as she climbed the staircase. The storm outside raged harder, as if the mansion itself sensed what she had uncovered. And from that day forward, Evelyn Harrow-Linden lived with a new fear. If a mansion is built to watch you, who is it watching for? Chapter 4. The heir, who was never meant to inherit every dynasty, has an heir. But some heirs are created by design, others by desperation. And a few, like the Harrow-Linden heiress, are never meant to survive long enough to inherit for nearly a century. The Harrow-Linden mansion had passed from father to son with obsessive, almost religious precision. The estate was not simply inherited, it was anointed. The heir was groomed, trained, sculpted into the next custodian of wealth, secrets, and social power. But in Evelyn's generation, something broke, or rather, someone vanished. The vanishing of Aldrich Linden, before Evelyn was born. There had been another child, a boy, a son. One the public forgot because the family forced them to forget. Aldrich Linden III, the perfect Harrow-Linden heir. Disciplined, polished, raised for one purpose: to inherit the most feared and admired Gilded Age estate in America. He was everything the dynasty demanded, but the mansion had a way of rejecting certain souls. Late one winter night, when Aldrich was 15, he disappeared inside the estate. The official story released to the newspapers claimed he had slipped on the icy cliffs behind the orchard and drowned. But no body was ever found. Not a boot print, not a coat button, not a scrap of fabric, just a single set of footprints leading toward the cliffs, and none returning. The whispers around town grew dark and creative. Some believed he ran away. Others insisted the mansion took him, that it had always been hungry, as the old groundskeeper said, but the truth was more unsettling. The Harrow-Linden family knew exactly what happened to him. They had documents, letters, logs, and they buried them deeper than any grave. After Aldrich's disappearance, the mansion's patriarch, Theodore Linden, fell into a terrifying silence. He locked the West Wing. He fired half the staff. He removed every portrait of Aldrich from the halls. He even ordered the family crest deliberately removing the tiny AL. Initials hidden in the original STONEWORK, it was as if Aldrich had never existed. But you cannot erase an heir without consequence, because without a male successor, the dynasty was exposed. A dynasty without a future asterisk. The Gilded Age was a world built on lineage, estate, bloodlines. Old money families clung to male heirs. The way soldiers cling to weapons in battle, a dynasty without a son was a dynasty in decline, and decline was death when Aldrich vanished. Whispers spread through the Fifth Avenue drawing rooms. The Harrow-Lindens are finished. The estate will crumble within a generation. The curse has finally taken its rightful heir. Investments began to withdraw. Alliances weakened. Rival families descended like vultures, and so, in desperation, Theodore Linden turned to his last option, a fragile, fate-bending decision that changed the family forever. He declared his unborn daughter the next heir. Evelyn Harrow-Linden, but this was not a victory in Gilded Age society. A female heir to such a massive estate was considered a scandal, almost a tragedy. Women were not trusted with dynastic fortunes, and powerful rivals would see her as an opportunity or prey. A girl inheriting the Harrow-Linden empire was unthinkable. Of course, she wasn't meant to survive long enough to inherit at all the hidden ambitions. Behind Evelyn's birth, after Aldrich's disappearance, Theodore's behavior changed. He became obsessive, secretive, paranoid about bloodline stability, and consumed by the fear of public humiliation. He did not visit the nursery. He never attended Evelyn's birthdays. He rarely spoke to her, except to issue quiet warnings about obedience, propriety, and surveillance. But privately, in the ledgers Evelyn found in the secret room, he referred to her not as one heir, but as a temporary measure, a placeholder, a tool. The exact wording in one ledger read, EHL designated interim beneficiary until succession is corrected. Succession is corrected, meaning until another male heir could be produced, groomed or adopted into power, to Theodore. Evelyn was not the future. She was an inconvenience to be managed, quietly, until a more suitable heir appeared. Yet fate had other plans. The mansion rejects its new heir from the moment Evelyn learned to walk. The mansion treated her differently. Doors jammed when she approached. The corridors went silent. The gas lamps flickered when she entered rooms. Servants whispered her name in fearful tones, as if she carried a shadow with her and Theodore. He watched her with a strange mixture of dread and anger, because deep down he knew something the world did not. The mansion had never accepted a female heir. Not once in its entire history. Every daughter born to the dynasty grew sick, faded, or disappeared into sanitariums by adulthood. However, flourished until Aldrich the old staff believed the mansion was rejecting her because she was born from tragedy. She inherited the curse. She knew too much before she even understood words. But there is another possibility, the one Evelyn would eventually uncover. The mansion was built on a foundation of betrayal, and her bloodline carried the truth of that betrayal. The house didn't reject Evelyn, it feared her, a child raised in shadows. As Evelyn grew older, her isolation deepened. She was educated not by tutors, but by carefully selected handlers, stern, expressionless instructors who monitored her more than they taught. She was not allowed to attend balls or garden parties, no visits with neighboring families, no playdates, no excursions into town. Her world was the mansion. Every hall, every creaking stair, every whispering wall, it shaped her. It confined her. It watched her. And yet, in that suffocating darkness, a spark of rebellion formed. The same spark her brother Aldrich once carried. The spark the dynasty feared more than ruin itself, because Evelyn Harrow-Linden was not weak nor fragile, nor temporary. She was perceptive, brilliant, and dangerously curious. She asked questions no heir male or female ever dared ask. Questions the family swore no one must ask again. Questions about Aldrich, about inheritance, about the sealed West Wing, about the financial collapse hinted in coded ledgers, about the archive her father called the sins of our empire. And as she probed deeper into the family's secrets, the estate began to respond. Lights flickered. Footsteps echoed behind her when no one was there. Doors locked. Objects moved. The staff refused to enter rooms she had visited. Even her father began to avoid her presence, because Evelyn was uncovering a truth that could destroy the Harrow-Linden legacy in a single generation. The truth that would force the mansion, the most cursed in Gilded Age history, to reveal its deepest, darkest secret. And that secret begins with the heir who vanished, and the heir who was never meant to exist. Chapter 5. The Ball That Broke the Dynasty in the Gilded Age. Nothing announced power more than a ball. A single evening of opulence could cement a family's status, or unravel it entirely. And for the Harrow-Lindens, one night in 1889 would do both. The mansion, perched precariously on the cliffs overlooking the Atlantic, had been silent for months. Its hallways still smelled of marble polish and candle wax. Its gilded chandeliers had been cleaned and repolished until they gleamed like the ambition of the family itself. Charles Harrington, Evelyn's great-uncle, by marriage. A man who had once laughed in the faces of old money families had insisted, "We will show them. The Harrington name is eternal." The event would be the grandest ball Newport had ever seen. 700 guests, champagne imported from France, gold-trimmed carriages lining the cliffside driveway, orchestras playing symphonies in crystal halls, the entire mansion illuminated with hundreds of gas lamps, so bright the estate appeared to float above the Atlantic fog. But what made the ball extraordinary was not merely its extravagance, it was its desperation. It was the Harrow-Lindens' last attempt to cement their relevance, to mask the cracks growing in both fortune and legacy. Evelyn, now 16, was present, though her presence was barely acknowledged. Her father, Theodore, had dressed her in a gown of white satin trimmed with pearls. Her hair framed her pale face, the color of moonlight, eyes wide with trepidation. She walked the hallways carefully, as though the mansion itself might swallow her if she misstepped. Guests marveled at the opulence. They whispered about the wealth, the architecture, the sheer audacity of the Harrington-Harrow-Linden empire. But behind every polite smile, there were glances of suspicion. Rumors had begun to circulate about the family, about Aldrich's disappearance, about the sealed West Wing, about the estate's strange reputation. As midnight approached, the orchestra played a crescendo of violins, and a hush fell over the ballroom. A portrait of Aldrich, painted as a young boy, had been hung above the main staircase, a reminder of the lost heir. The dynasty's failure to produce a male successor, guests claimed they felt a cold draft despite the roaring fires. A chandelier swayed slightly, though there was no wind. Whispers of "the mansion is alive" began circulating, among servants and guests alike, and then the first scream, it came from the West Wing, where no guest dared enter. A maid ran into the ballroom, her face pale. "Something's happened," she stammered. But before anyone could ask, the chandelier directly above Evelyn's head swung violently, casting fractured patterns of light and shadow across the marble floor. Panic spread. Some guests insisted the floor trembled. Others swore the walls groaned in response to unseen weight. And then the portrait of Aldrich fell from its mount, shattering into thousands of shards of glass. Like frozen screams suspended in time, Evelyn froze, her hands gripping her gown. She understood instinctively this was no accident. The mansion itself was rebelling. It remembered the heir it had lost. It remembered the family's sins. The rest of the night descended into chaos. Servants fled corridors, tripping over marble steps and leaving trays of champagne broken. Some guests, trying to flee, found doors locked or hallways that led nowhere. Gas lamps flickered, plunging the estate intermittently into darkness. A sense of malice hung over the gathering, tangible and heavy, as though centuries of ambition and cruelty had condensed into the very air. The Harrington-Harrow-Linden dynasty had tried to present a united, impenetrable front, but the mansion would not allow it. It would not forgive the past, nor conceal the truth behind blood, ambition, and secrecy. By dawn, the ballroom lay in ruin. Broken crystal, shattered mirrors, portraits askew. A mansion that had witnessed 100 years of celebration now witnessed its first true act of vengeance. Narrator, society, left in silence. The newspapers never reported the events truthfully. Guests claimed only a minor structural issue, a gas leak, or sudden tremor. But those who remained, those who dared peek behind the mansion's gates in the weeks after the ball, reported whispers, shadowy figures, footsteps on empty staircases, and, occasionally, the sound of a piano playing at midnight. The aftermath of the ball cemented the mansion's dark reputation. No other family dared host an event of such scale in its halls. The Harrington Harrow-Linden name, once synonymous with wealth, ambition, and power, became a word whispered behind closed doors. And for Evelyn, the events of that night marked the beginning of a personal reckoning. She realized the mansion was not merely a building. It was a sentient archive of betrayal, a silent witness to ambition, murder, greed, and madness. It reminded me of Aldrich. It remembered Theodore's manipulations, and it now watched her. For the first time, Evelyn understood the dynasty she had inherited was already dead. The mansion would not protect her. The curse was real, and her life, like the estate itself, was now intertwined with a power far older and far darker than wealth. By the time the sun rose over the Atlantic cliffs, the Harrington Harrow-Linden mansion stood as it always had. Grand, formidable, but scarred, an eternal monument to ambition and failure. Haunted by the legacy of the ball that broke the dynasty, the family would never again host such grandeur. The estate would never again echo with laughter. And for Evelyn, the forgotten heiress in the making, the mansion had already begun to claim her spirit. The ball was not the end, it was only the beginning, a prelude to scandal, ruin, and the unraveling of the most cursed mansion in Gilded Age history. Chapter 7. The Heir Who Tried to Save. After Charles Harrington's death. The mantle of the cursed estate fell to Alexander Harrington, a young man determined to reclaim both fortune and honor. He was educated, idealistic, and fundamentally different from his father Gentle, where Charles had been ruthless, cautious where Charles had been bold. But ambition, like legacy, can be a dangerous inheritance. Alexander's first steps into the mansion as master of the estate were tentative. The West Wing, where Evelyn had vanished years before, was sealed and decayed. The air smelled of salt, mold, and the faint metallic temps of old misfortune. Servants spoke in hushed tones of shadows moving along the corridors, lights flickering without explanation, and the piano that sometimes played itself in the dead of night. Alexander dismissed some tales as superstition, but a part of him wondered if the house remembered his family's sins. Determined to restore the estate, he initiated massive renovations. Floors were repaired, walls repainted, the gardens pruned and restored to their former French-inspired glory. Alexander's vision was meticulous. The Harrington mansion would once again symbolize dignity and prestige, yet every success was followed by inexplicable setbacks. Tools vanished, workers reported falls or fainting spells, and structural anomalies, walls tilting, stairs shaking persisted as if the mansion itself resisted change. Within months, Alexander discovered Evelyn's diaries, hidden in a secret compartment beneath the library floorboards. Her words were chilling, recounting the watcher on the staircase, footsteps in empty halls, and a presence that pressed on her chest. A single line resonated with him. The house breathes. He could no longer ignore the mansion's power. Determined to preserve his family and his sanity, he sealed the West Wing completely, sleeping in a small servants' quarters at night. But nature, fate, and the mansion's malevolence were not so easily restrained. One night, during a violent storm that shook the cliffs and lashed the estate with unrelenting wind, Alexander vanished. His bedroom door was found locked from the inside. No note, no trace. Only the echo of footsteps leading into the storm, as if the mansion itself had claimed him, just as it had his sister years before. The Harrington mansion now bore two disappearances, two souls entwined with its walls, hallways, and shadows. Society whispered that the estate had become a living entity, feeding on ambition, grief, and the sins of its owners. Chapter 8. The Silent Years. By the early 1900s. The Harrington mansion stood abandoned. Its halls, once alive with music, conversation, and the laughter of elite guests were empty and echoing. Salt winds from the Atlantic whistled through broken windows. Marble steps were slick with moss, and ivy crept along the facade like the fingers of time itself. The gardens returned to wilderness, statues and fountains eroded by wind and rain. Locals told stories of flickering lights at night, a piano playing in the empty ballroom, and figures glimpsed moving through shattered windows. Fishermen avoided the cliffs below, claiming the waves carried a mournful rhythm, as if echoing the mansion's tragic history for decades. The estate remained untouched, a mausoleum of old wealth and ambition. The Harrington name faded from newspapers, replaced by whispers and folklore. Paranormal investigators, historians, and curious trespassers occasionally ventured inside, reporting cold drafts, shadowy silhouettes, and inexplicable sounds of staircase, groaning as though someone still walked upon it. The mansion had transcended architecture. It had become myth, its story of dynasties' rise, opulence, betrayals, and disappearances was embedded in its very stones. Chapter 9, The Final OWNR, 1924. Henry Caldwell, a wealthy banker from Boston, purchased the estate at auction. He dismissed stories of curses as superstition, confident that wealth and reason could tame the mansion. Within months, Caldwell's confidence eroded. Servants quit, citing an oppressive atmosphere and strange shadows in the halls. His wife refused to stay after reporting whispers at night and the feeling of unseen eyes following her. Caldwell himself suffered insomnia, nightmares, and hallucinations of figures staring from empty corridors. One night, after months of torment and isolation, Henry Caldwell walked into the Atlantic and was never seen again. Local papers described it as a tragic suicide, but whispers said the mansion claimed him as it had claimed Evelyn and Alexander Harrington. From that moment, the estate stood untouched, a relic of ambition, greed, and tragedy, slowly crumbling into ruin. Chapter 10. The haunting leads JSTY today. The Harrington Mansion is a ruin. Its shattered windows, rotting timbers, and overgrown gardens stand as testament to the dangers of unchecked ambition. Scholars call it a historic estate, emblematic of the Gilded Age's hubris. Paranormal enthusiasts speak of lingering presences, shadows that move on their own, whispers on the wind, and ghostly figures watching from the cliffs. The story of the Harrington dynasty is a tale of wealth and power undone by scandal, betrayal, and the mansion's own malignant presence. Every decision, every secret, every ambition carved into marble and timber ultimately fueled its curse. Evelyn Harrington, the Forgotten Heiress, remains the haunting symbol of the mansion's legacy. Her disappearance, Alexander's vanishing, and the final collapse under Henry Caldwell's brief ownership are woven into a narrative that transcends history, a cautionary tale about the fragile, human truths hidden beneath gilded ceilings. The mansion embodies everything the Gilded Age tried to hide: greeded-eyed candles, broken families, the fatal cost of ambition, and, somewhere on the cliffs, when the wind howls just right, one can hear a whisper. Everything dies, even empires. The Harrington Mansion, cursed and abandoned, remains a silent witness to the rise and fall of a dynasty that dared to defy time, society, and the natural order. Thanks for watching.